communities. There are lots of people that depend on the services that are provided at a local government level. But what we also know is that if we look at the very least at reports such as those of the Auditor General, it is the one sphere of government that seems to be in a state of crisis. And as we think about how to fix problems of local government, if we think about the kind of leadership that we need at a local government, we also have to reflect then on the problems that we are facing. And the theme for today is fixing local government, right? It sounds easy, but in order to fix something, we first have to begin with what is broken. We have to understand what the problem is, and most importantly, how it came about, so that the solutions that are developed can speak to those problems. Now, I'm not by myself today. I've got a great lineup of panelists that are going to help answer some of the big questions around local government, but they're also just going to give us their insight in terms of what's happening in the country right now. And the issues that we as not just voters, but also as citizens need to be aware of as we go into this important phase of the elections, and as we decide who exactly we're going to give our votes to, and whether or not those individuals are actually deserving of the vote. So let me welcome onto the panel this morning, Crispian Olver. Good morning, Crispian. It's a pleasure to have you on. We're going to invite also Miyelani Holeni. Miyelani, hello. Pleasure to have you on too. And Dr. Thina Nzo.
Thank you.
Now, the reality of the matter is that our panelists are really the experts here. I'm just the person with the microphone, I guess. So we're going to be leaning on them a lot to give us their insights and expertise. No pressure on you guys, you know, but really we're looking for your best work here today, you know. What I'll do is that we'll begin by opening the floor up. And I want our panelists to really speak to the theme, fixing local government. I want to get just your reflections on it. And then after that, we'll get into more of a conversation. And later on, we'll open this conversation up to those that have joined it. Let me welcome Dr. Crispian Olver, who is our first guest. Now, he's a local government policy expert and author with a particular interest in how cities are governed. As an anti-apartheid activist in the 1980s and 90s. He was a leader of the End Conscription campaign, as well as involved in the drafting of the Reconstruction and Development Program. Now, he's got lots of expertise when it comes to work in government. Some of the title, he's also an author, and you might better know him as the author of the book titled How to Steal a City. You'd remember one of those that showed us exactly what the state of affairs was at the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. And he's also authored a second book, A House Divided, and that was published in 2019. Dr. Olver, let me open the floor up to you just to reflect on the theme that we're discussing today, fixing local government. As the fixer, you're the only real life fixer, by the way, that I know. You're the male version of Olivia Pope, right? So tell us about what the state of the Nelson Mandela Bay, or not the state of Nelson Mandela Bay, but what fixing local government is actually going to take. Dr. Olver, I seem to be having a problem in terms of hearing you.
Sorry, I was muted.
There we go.
My apologies. Just to say thank you for the kind introduction. You've now set me up, so I hope I don't disappoint. And thank you for the topic, particularly to the accountability lab, which is extremely relevant given that all South African people of voting age now have a really important choice about which of the political parties out there you're going to go and put your cross next to and choose to run your local municipality for the next 5 years. And, you know, we've got now quite a lot of experience with different parties running different municipalities and how they're doing. And, you know, I spend my time studying the ones that don't work. So my outlook might be a little bit jaundiced. You know, there are lots of areas in local government that work really well and they deliver services like they're meant to, and they're not corrupt. And the civil servants that are employed there, you know, do their job and are passionate about it. But equally, there are places that are really broken. Some of the big cities like Nelson Mandela Bay is broken. But as you get down to the smaller and smaller rural municipalities, I mean, I spend a lot of time in the Eastern Cape, and there are parts of the Eastern Cape where people literally don't have local government. They're in the rural villages, there's no water provided, there's no refuse collection, there's no sanitation system, you're on your own. So we've got these, you know, very different poles. It works really well in some places, particularly the big cities, and it works really badly, a few of the big cities and a lot of the rural, smaller municipalities. There are two big issues we've got to talk about. The one is the set of legacy issues. And I know, you know, 25 years after apartheid ended, you'd expect things to have corrected, but we've got a huge legacy problem of the way that South Africa was divided up and racially segregated and people forced into different parts of the country and governed by very unequal municipalities. And that legacy still hangs over us. And we've then got a set of political problems, which most of the parties, I'm afraid, are guilty in. And this is where there's an overbearing political meddling in the administration. Sometimes innocently, it's not always corrupt. Some of it is corrupt. Sometimes it's just politicians who genuinely think that they're the ones that have the answers and they don't listen to the bureaucrats, and they drive through really badly thought out policies and changes. So, for instance, in Cape Town that I studied, so-called a really well-run city, I was surprised to see this DA administration that was deeply involved in, you know, pushing property deals and planning decisions that they shouldn't have been doing. So anyway, that's my quick summary. Sorry, I spoke too long, Cathy. You told me not to hog the floor. We can come back to how to fix these problems.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Olver, and just for your perspective there. And certainly, I think one of the important points that you've made is that oftentimes the problems that we're seeing at a local government level are not intentional. And that really speaks to the issue of capacity. That's going to be a big one when it comes to needing to fix whatever it is that might be broken. Miyelani, Holeni, let me invite you up next as our speaker today. Of course, you have over 20 years of corporate and management consulting experience, a postgraduate diploma. I'm going to sound like I'm reading your CV now, Miyelani, but perhaps let me go to like the relevant points where you have managed a portfolio of about 25 medium to mega projects and have acted in the position of director income in the Ekurhuleni Metro and are now actively involved in terms of providing solutions to the local government space.
Thank you very much. I think talking of local government on our side is something that is a passion, because we're seeing that local government, you know, as being the center of where people live, where people access their services, where people basically do everything, and their life revolves around a municipality in a particular area. It becomes a crucial issue that local government must work, and it must work for the people within there. So one of the things I thought I would open with is the fact that, you know, we have a local government white paper, which was well written in 1999 with a particular view of where we would be today, which is 2020. So if you look at where almost 21 years after the local government system was in place, of course, it was informed a lot by the historical side of things, which Dr. Olver mentioned, of the segregation and all of the things that created different structures of municipalities, the black local councils, on the other side, the town councils, which were along racial lines, run by these so-called, white, administrators. And so all of those things, start to come into play when you want to look at how you fix local government, because there are historical issues and some of them very uncomfortable subjects that we talk about, but it's things that at least can give us a perspective of how to fix it. So the first thing I'd put forward is that the local government white paper was espousing a South Africa and saying that it has been given a rare opportunity to transform local government to meet the challenges of the next century. So that is how it opens in its first line. So whether we've seized the opportunity or not remains to be discussed in this meeting. Number one is we have a lot of work to undo what has already happened in the past, which is the fact that there are different and separate structures of managing municipalities, and the fact that we have taken a model which was transposed from another country, which is the Canadian system of how the South African government structure is located, and how then it transposes into local government of metros, of districts, as well as local municipalities. Number two is the issue of creating an inclusive society, which is something that has been quite a challenge because the rural municipalities by design end up being in the outskirts and serving a particular sector of the people. And number three was the task of building a new system that would then take everyone forward. So I think from our side, the problems that we're seeing is the financial constraints, if you want to fix local government, that exist. Number two are the institutional arrangements that we have to revisit, whether through the Municipal Systems Act and the structures and the MFMA and the legislation that has come through. The second issue is that we have a distorted local government, which is not able to reach the vulnerable or the lowest of the people within the South African the country. And finally, the transitions that our municipalities are going through with the changes that happen every time there's an election. There's a reconfiguration of municipalities, of boundaries, of changes, of increasing debt, and so on. So we are facing a local government that is in a state of flux, but has not quite dealt with the undoing of the things that are causing it not to work today, and sitting as well with having to create new things, as well as how to take local government forward. And very practically is, if you look at metros are traditionally your wealthier, your high budget municipalities. Your districts don't really have functions that generate revenue for them. Your locals, you find a mix of the ones that are emerging towns or the transit towns that at least have some kind of a base, but all the others may not have an economic base to be able to create this transformation or fixing of local government. So they don't have the capability to fix themselves because of the poor funding model or the lack of a funding model or the lack of an economic base to take them forward. So I think that is what we are seeing from our side, that if we are to fix local government, there are a couple of components that we need to go into in a lot more depth that will at least help us to move forward and fix local government once and for all.
Miyelani, just listening to you, one gets the sense that the problem is very complex. And in order to solve it, you almost have to look at multiple issues that will ultimately lead you, I suppose, on the right path that all citizens would be wanting, which is a path where service delivery has reached some form of equilibrium, and that access, like you're saying, the divide between the rural areas and the metro areas is not perhaps as wide as we see it right now. So quite a bit for us to reflect on, at least just based on the part of what you've raised. Dr. Thina Nzo, let me invite you in to perhaps just give us your opening reflections. And of course, Dr. Nzo holds a PhD in African Studies and a master's in local government studies. And she uses an disciplinary approach to the study of politics and policy, and it's underpinned by her interest in employing qualitative research and organizational ethnography to study local government bureaucracies in South Africa. Dr. Nzo, I'm going to get my dictionary just to try and understand, just the full complexity of the work that you do. But in your own words, your reflections on our theme, fixing local government.
Thanks, Cathy. Well, just basically, my interests are around local government and really understanding the practice and policy in local government. But just to try and reflect on what we need to do to fix local government, you're absolutely right, Cathy. Local government is a very complex sphere. And it makes it so, what makes it so complex, it's because there are so many political dynamics that also play, into the institutional arrangements of different municipalities. So that's why you find that when we do our work, we have to take into consideration that political context, of course, that is shaped by the historical trajectory, as Oliver had actually indicated. So one of the things that we really need to reflect on is really what are these audit outcomes and declining quality of services really telling us about the quality of representative democracy? Because what we have seen over the past few years, particularly around the early 2000s, is the increase in protest action. Communities were starting to protest against poor service delivery. But again, we also understand that some of these protests and these contestations, they were engulfed around the contestation of political office, of course, and list processes that are in relation to the way in which we select our PR councillors and ward councillors, which are very partisan based. But another thing that we also need to take into consideration is how did we find ourselves with issues around poor service delivery? And that comes back to my interest around bureaucracies, how local government bureaucracies operate. And we find that when it comes to issues of professionalization and the capacity of municipal officials, it is left, and there are so many things that have played into the decapitation, I call it decapitation of our local government bureaucracy, which are, again, centered around patronage politics, that municipalities, which really doesn't talk to the skill set that we are looking for, and also issues around corruption, which are led by patronage politics. Because if you've got a partisan bureaucracy, that bureaucracy obviously owes its loyalty to its political incumbents, and therefore that's why they end up finding themselves in compromised professional ethical situations where they have to be submissive towards these political partisan and also patrimonial interests. So it's around issues of capacity, it's around issue of professionalization, which I really think have contributed immensely to the decapitation of local government in terms of its performance, which have obviously led to citizens' lack of confidence in the system of local government and its representation. We also found that in the previous years, when the local government voter turnout actually demonstrated the way in which citizens feel about local government, we saw how even the ruling party lost their overwhelming majority in some of these popular municipalities, especially when it comes to city metros. And this really should tell us about the state in which our local government has really been declining over the years. And it's something that we should be thinking about in terms of how do we really nip it in the bud when it comes to all the malpractices that we are seeing in local government.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Nzo. The issue of professionalization of the public service, it's a big problem. And I think not just at a local government sphere, but literally across the board. When you look at the state of South Africa, some of our SOEs, some of the questions that need to be answered really come back to the issue of whether or not this, and we hear a lot of talk about it, right? Professionalizing the public service, but is it happening at the level and the scale that it needs to in order to make a tangible difference? So it's one of the issues I'm going to come back to. Often when we look at the participation, I think just of ordinary South Africans at local government level, elections become an easy go-to point because I can vote. And so every 5 years, I'll have to kind of maybe spend a sleepless night or two, depending on how seriously you take these matters, about who to vote for. But it seems to begin and end for many people on election day, and the participation seems to be confined solely within the prism of political parties and political organizations. And can local government function effectively without successful public participation and social engagement across the board? Dr. Olver, let me begin with you.
Yeah. I'm learning slowly. Sorry, Cathy. Next time I'll unmute in anticipation of your question. Look, participation is integral to the functioning of local government, but I do think we need to be realistic. Sometimes because I often get this with the city of Johannesburg where I live, I don't want to have a long consultation process about providing decent, clean drinking water and fixing the potholes and making sure the sewage runs. These are things local government should do. We shouldn't spend, weeks or months consulting on something that they're legislatively obliged to do. And what a lot of us just want to get on with the rest of our lives. So I know that, a lot of my colleagues will attack me for this kind of view. I mean, some people think as much participation as possible is a good thing. Having been a former government official, there's a certain time that you must listen and consult, and then you've got to get off your chair and go and do. And I think the problem we often have in government is that we don't do the second part. We do the first part. So we'll spend months talking about it, and we'll write fancy policy papers. And, government policy in South Africa is world class. We've got excellent policy. We're extremely bad at putting that into practice. So I will answer your question by saying, yes, participation, but it's got to be accompanied by doing. Even for the least capacitated municipality, do the basics. I've often encountered these small dysfunctional municipalities who've set up economic development agencies, and they've got a really impressive, youth and gender program. And, these are good things. But there's sewage running down the main road of the township, and there are water leaks that are draining the local dam, and they run out of water 2 or 3 days a week. So you've got to get your priorities right. Sometimes I think the leaders we elect into local government haven't thought through the ABC of local government. We can do the nice big vision stuff, and have fancy plans, but you've got to do that at the same time as ensuring that the basics are in place. We used to have this program in local government called Back to Basics. And the idea of back to basics was do the things that really matter. Because, if people don't have clean drinking water or proper sanitation or electricity, The kids can't study at night for school. People get sick from gastroenteritis. You know, it takes hours out of every day for people to go and fetch water from the local standpipe or water tanker. So I don't know. I hope I'm not being too cynical in replying to your question.
No, not cynical at all, but I suppose on some level quite realistic about what the expectation of just an ordinary man on the street might be of their local government. So before I can go to the meeting at the city hall, can I at least have electricity and perhaps, you know, reliable water supply that might incentivize me to show up more for those meetings. So I think it's an important point. But Miyelani, we know that when it comes to holistically, municipalities cannot function without good relationships with multiple stakeholders, not least among them being their residents.
So from our side, I think, you know, and taking from the points that have been mentioned by Dr. Thina and Dr. Crispian, is the fact that we want to have a system that is, well, it's now called, or has been called for a long time, cooperative governance. So, and in cooperative governance, it means that there are a number of stakeholders that play a role within the local government system. But the trick of it is that each and every stakeholder must know their role, must understand their functions, and must understand how they interface with the next. So to have local government that works well, it means that there are stakeholders, and I'll give an example such as ESCOM is a big stakeholder. The water service authorities and service providers are stakeholders within there. There is also the intergovernmental relations system that we have of the provincial as well as the national. So really there are multiple, and the civic society that is also part of the local government system. So the issue of relationships is crucial, because if we don't have proper relationships that are going to be able to lead to a positive development and positive relations in terms of dealing with the local government, it becomes something that is counterproductive, because the relationships are key. And this is when we must talk about strategic partnering. We're not talking about just the simple things of saying, I'm bringing an IDP to a particular area and people must comment on it. But how do you partner amongst yourselves as stakeholders within the local government system, and not have fights where the other one owes the other money, such as municipalities owing ESCOM and wanting to switch off, you know, the areas. So the part of collaboration and the cooperative governance is one that we need to be talking about, as well as now partnering with the citizen. And the citizen is that person on the ground that says, I know that you must do the basics well, but these are the other needs that we have beyond what you are providing to us. But let's help you to do the basics and report the issues and become part of and parcel of the solution of fixing, whether there's fixing of potholes or fixing of whatever, through reporting. But also the municipalities also need to look at how do we partner with the communities to be able to do the really small things that can irritate the citizens, that, you know, we don't need to be spending 2 weeks to sort out. So I think from our side, you know, the fact that, you know, there's this whole thing called cooperative governance, and now we are evolving it and we're saying, let's look at the strategic partnering relationships. So a customer, or is not just a customer because they are paying rates, but they become a partner to the municipality. And I think that is what needs to be harnessed in a more positive way, so that there's obviously cooperation, and also the cooperation within the stakeholders themselves, such as, you know, ESCOM, as well as the municipalities or your water service authorities, and so on and so forth. So there's actually a relationship mending process that needs to be undertaken, that defines the roles of each one, the functions of each one, and how each one interfaces towards making sure that local government works. And part of what ability says, which is the IDP, what type of leadership do we have that can take the IDPs and the strategies forward? But then the basics of it is, how do we then deliver services in a partnership model, in a strategic partnering model that enables the citizen to receive their services and for us to be able to do what we need to do. So I think from our side is we need to really look at, this whole notion of cooperative governance, taking it forward into a strategic partnering model where local government is not just, or municipalities are not just doing things because they are mandated, but they must do things with the customer in mind, that the customer is a partner, and that customer is the one that's going to enable the municipality to function, because they will then pay for their services and will not withhold their monies, and they will then become a positive force towards now the development and doing more than the basics. I think the one issue that was raised by Dr. Thina is that we are living from election to election. Next year, going into an election year, customers change from being customers, they become voters. And certain things fall through the cracks because of that notion of wanting to live from election to election. But if we build a strategic partnership with the communities, one that lives beyond the elections, if we can do that, is one that can at least create a continuity in the system of local government, which is something that we don't enjoy from one election as a transition to the next one. So we seem to regress each time we go from one transition to the next.
When you talk about, residents being customers, this is often not the experience of many residents at a local government level. In fact, when you listen to some of the anecdotes that people will share, more often than not, when they're asking for things to be done, it's almost like they're asking for a favor, like it's not something that they deserve to have. And people are literally sent from pillar to post in order to be able just to get the very basics done. Dr. Nzo, I want you to speak to us about just the hierarchy that seems to have developed at local government level. There are all these stakeholders that Miyelani has spoken to. More often than not, we are given the impression that the strategic partners are business, and then maybe it will be some of the other important players in as far as the economy is concerned. But certainly the residents seem to be at the very, very bottom of that list when it comes to having good stakeholder engagement.
Cathy, what we also need to remember as we also talk about the basic fundamental understanding of what local government is. Local government is a sphere that is designed to be closest, to the people, to the citizens, to the communities and constituencies, because we've got other spheres of government that have got different responsibilities that are more national than any other responsibility. So the fundamental principle should be the first priority stakeholder. That's why community participation is always rooted within the local government processes. You cannot pass a budget without going through the IDP and budgeting consultation processes, particularly with communities. And that's why we even have decentralized structures such as ward committees, where communities are able to express their service delivery interest and development interest through their ward committee representatives coming from the different sectors of society. But we know that these structures, they are quite dysfunctional on their own. They have been embroiled in local politics of the day, which tend to be very exclusionary in that practice. But again, with these community interests by the councillor, who is the chairperson of this ward committee, needs to take these interests and priorities and development issues to council to represent them in council and also in the different committees. But again, there is another institutional arrangement hierarchy that comes into play, which also takes into consideration the various limitations on municipal finances and revenue collection, and also the fiscal muscle of municipalities, not to mention the equitable share that is slowly but surely diminishing. I mean, this year, the equitable share has been tremendously cut down for municipalities. So you find that municipalities now have to set certain priorities around these issues. And that's where some of the issues around having the community as the major stakeholder, having these priorities being reflected, are then deviated to other issues that are considered to be more important by the various committees, like the mayoral committee, or the committees that are under the disconnection. And that's why you find that when communities are expecting, potholes to be fixed, their roads to be built, or even sanitation and pipes bursting is supposed to be resolved, you find that those issues are not appearing to be and acted upon at a very, urgent perspective. So sometimes it's that kind of hierarchy and also the disjuncture that happens where you find that the representation of communities in these institutional structures do not resonate with what communities had actually expected as the major stakeholders. So that's the kind of emphasis that one must not forget, that communities are the primary stakeholders, and participation should be centered around community interests as well.
With the state of affairs being as all of you have so clearly outlined, does that mean that we are in the unavoidable space where, or has it become unavoidable rather, that our politics at a local level will continue to be fragmented, and that the setup of coalition governments / non-coalition governments, because you'll hear some parties saying, no, we're not in coalition, we just gave them their vote, but don't involve us in anything that they do effectively. Does that mean that that's going to be the tone of what our politics at a local level looks like going forward, especially when perhaps we just look at the 2021 election?
Yeah, I mean, can I reply to that, Cathy? So, I think coalitions are going to be part of the future. Our electoral politics is becoming increasingly competitive. That's a good thing. We're slowly moving from a very dominant single party system to real competition at a local level. And that's excellent. We're now able to make real choices between parties and to vote for the parties and the councillors that we think are going to do a good job and represent us. And you don't have to vote for the same party at local level as you vote for national level. So you can vote tactically as well, which I think is a great thing about our system. We've had a bad experience with coalition government. I mean, on the whole, they haven't worked. Certainly this latest crop, the sort of post-2016 coalitions, where the DA and the EFF, I mean, it's really hard to find any common ground in terms of a policy platform between those parties. They were united only because they wanted to get the ANC out of power. And I have to say that's an inadequate basis to form a coalition government. A coalition government's got to be formed.
Dr. Olver, I just want to come in there and just bring perhaps something different, because often when we hear political parties talk about the common ground, it's through the perspective of their manifestos and policies, etc. But what about citizens? Are the voters not common ground? And the interests of voters, are those not common ground?
Well, no. Of course, that should, that should be the starting point for any discussion. I'm afraid it's not always the case, but we do need to demand of our political parties a little bit more maturity in the way they form coalitions and the stability of those coalition governments. We can't have a situation in which every coalition is unstable, it's jostling, you're trying to get people in and out. All of the coalition partners are looking for bits of rent and, you know, tenders and deals. I mean, here in Joburg, you know, the only way that the Herman Mashaba's coalition was held together was that he gave large chunks of control, you know, like the IFP and the EFF got some key tenders and awards. I mean, yeah, I'm naming parties, but let me say, in naming parties, there's not a single party I've discovered that has not been involved in one way or another in this kind of business. So I'm not taking particular positions on parties, but what I'm asking for is a greater level of maturity in the way that we approach coalitions, and the development of at least some kind of common platform, which has to be put into a coalition agreement. There needs to be some kind of reference point or document where you can say, this is the platform for governing. You know, this DA-EFF coalition is going to govern on this basis. We disagree on X, Y, and Z, but we agree to govern on these 3 or 4 key issues.
What do you think are the lessons that can be learned, Dr. Olver, specifically from the experience of the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, especially when you look at the state of dysfunction that it is in today, and how different systems there have collapsed, but that the fighting between the parties has also perhaps been much worse than we've seen in other areas of the country, where in other metros where there were these kind of agreements.
Yeah. Look, the tragedy of Nelson Mandela Bay is that they've had some really good municipal officials who have been chased out of the system by a succession of political leaders. So I don't know if you remember, but they had the city manager called Lindium Sengane Ndlela. I mean, she highly competent, very principled, a woman of, you know, the utmost integrity. And when the ANC was still in power, she would not allow them to push through that bus rapid transit system tender that they all ended up stealing so much money from. So she stood her ground. They chased, I mean, they waged a campaign against that woman. You know, they harassed her at home. She was driven out of the metro. I mean, using fear and intimidation. They've just lost another city manager, Johan Metler. I mean, when I was involved in the city, he was brought in. The DA coalition kept him on very sensibly because he's a highly competent manager. Then with all this nonsense around Mongameli Bobani and now an ANC acting mayor, I mean, it's, you know, it's an ongoing drama. But they suspend him, and they, you know, they pushed bogus disciplinary charges against him. So you've got this constant churn, you know, really good people in the system, coming up in the system, who could run that city well. You know, leave them to do their job properly, and they can fix what's broken. But we keep culling the good people at the top and leaving, of course, all the underperforming corrupt people because they do what the politicians ask them to do.
Miyelani, is the district development model going to help change any of this? Is that the answer?
Well, if we look at what the notion behind the district development model, it's meant to bring back local government to where it was initially planned, you know, to be, and it's to bring the stakeholders at a particular level. The districts seem to be that focal point where municipalities, at least, you know, can coordinate their efforts, because the whole issue of where local government should be is that it should be maximizing the social development and economic growth. I think that is what we need to be harnessing from a local government that works well. This is from the white paper. The integration and coordination of all the efforts and the resources that are available, meager as they may be, but need to be at least, there must be integration between the budget of all the municipalities within a district towards achieving a particular goal, which will benefit the entire district and all other districts as well that will also follow this follow suit, will then benefit. The other part, which is maybe slightly more political or at a high level, is democratizing development. But also, so I think for us, the district development model is one model that if perhaps people as well as other stakeholders can bring their share and bring their resources and bring that coordination as well as the integration of planning, could start to improve how local government can start to function. Earlier, we also talked about the equitable share, but more broadly, the Division of Revenue Act, which allows national government, to at least have around 45% of the fiscus and provincial government around 43, whatever the mechanics are that, kind of end up happening. And we see resources not filtering fully into the local government. So the district development model should be able to identify funds that can help develop a particular area where funds have been allocated. And I'll give an example with electrification of communities. The Department of Energy sits with budgets which they would issue as grants and to the local municipalities for electrification, but those would need to be coordinated in a particular way. So there are a number of grants that local government has to go cap in hand at times to provincial government, to the national government, to almost motivate why they should have those grants, whereas those grants are meant for the development of the local area. So if the district development model can achieve the ways of at least integrating the planning as it espouses, but the coordinating aspect, and then the allocation of the resources, so that the resources at least are managed in a transparent and as well as equitable way. So we believe that there needs to be a focal point within the local government space. Metros do it quite well because they have the resources, they have the skills, and they have the capability. And as I've described what capability is, strategy, leadership, the capacity to deliver services. So if the district development model is meant to achieve that, then I think we are going somewhere towards improving the fact that local government can start working as a unit, as well as the other stakeholders can contribute to the unit. But the other things that I'd also like to bring forward is the fact that if you look at where we are currently with municipalities, as well as the funding models and so on and so forth, there needs to be a level of modernization of this entire landscape. And the modernization is that we need to look at using other channels or adopting technology and building a self-sufficient municipality where residents or ratepayers can be able to interact with municipalities in a way that reduces the effort and the cost of dealing with municipalities. So that is the other aspect that can also contribute to having a municipality, or at least a model that enables all stakeholders to work together. Because the district development model should never just be about the municipalities or the system of government and to the exclusion of the citizens. But the citizens as well, you need to give them additional things that they can be able to use to interact with the municipality. And they need to at least build a culture of service, which can help with taking the municipalities forward. So I think from where we are is we appreciate the efforts to bring back the focus into local government through the district development model. But there's a lot more other things around it that need to be then added, because it can't just be a model of integrating and coordination, allocation of resources, but we believe that there must be modernization of the entire landscape so that this landscape starts to operate not in a manual manner that or in an analog fashion of how it has always operated, because then we're not taking the local government's sphere of government forward in any way.
All right. Thanks for that, Miyelani. To all our participants that are part of this conversation, we're going to be taking your questions and answers, and you can just pop them into the Q&A box, and I'll be looking through some of them. In fact, let me kick it off with a question. And if you can be perhaps a bit clear in terms of who in particular you'd like to answer your question, but of course, we'll throw it out to any of the panelists who are willing to take them. I'll try and do 3 questions at a time. Select and Patlele says there are no proper internal controls in the sphere of government. Where did that message go? Okay, it's updating real time. So some of those messages are moving on. In fact, let me begin with Anonymous. Who says Dr. Olver's book, How to Steal a City, was a scary look into how bad things get. What are things looking like now in Nelson Mandela Bay? He's touched on that already. What does he think of the direction the DA is going? This is since his book on Cape Town. Sekwetlane Phamodi asks, what should be done to get citizens more involved in local governance? What are the real and available forums and mechanisms that citizens can use, that they can feel honestly seen and heard beyond voting? And somebody else wants to know from you, Miyelani, what does your company do for municipalities, and why are their finances still so bad? So we'll begin with those 3, and I'll give our panelists an opportunity to respond, and then I'll open up another round of questions. I don't know who wants to go first with tackling some of those. Maybe let's begin with the specific ones. Dr. Olver, I'll begin with you, and then Dr. Nzo, we haven't heard from you in a bit, so you can come in after Dr. Olver, and Miyelani, then we'll have the final take.
So, Nelson Mandela Bay, I'm sad to say, in fact, there needs to be a sequel to How to Steal a City, because it went from being, we had tried to fix the place up quite considerably, and then the ANC lost power, and this administration led by Athol Trollip came in. I have to say, my impression is that Trollip and his team did a really good job, but he failed in his ability to hold the coalition together. And that was partly because you had elements like the Patriotic Front and the UDM and this chap Mongameli Bobani, who were themselves jostling for power and contracts. There was this investigation done. Bobani was in charge of public health. That was the portfolio had been given, and waste management. And he was trying to get a whole string of corrupt tenders. The AG's put an investigation out on that. And, remarkably, I'd encountered Bobani when I was investigating in the city. And he was, in fact, he was smarter than any of the other ANC guys involved in corruption. He knew how to set up the deals, and he would teach the ANC councillors how to loot from the municipality. Unbelievably, this man becomes mayor. There's the Hawks were after him. There was a corruption case ready to be rolled out. He would have been arrested with this recent lot around the IPS thing. And the guy becomes mayor and runs the municipality for a protracted period of time. It almost beggars belief. The DA itself, there's a whole story around how the DA is imploded. And when I was investigating Cape Town, I was struck by the way that a fairly well-run city and a party that had 60, they had over 2/3 of the vote in the 2016 elections in Cape Town, enters into, there's this right-wing cabal that takes hold of the party, who are very uncomfortable with the social transformation agenda being pursued by people like Musi Maimane and Patricia de Lille. And I could see the split. I mean, the split started in Cape Town. And then, last year it finally erupted onto the national stage. And Herman Mashaba and Musi left, and, the rest is history. And, I think the DA has drifted to the right. Instead of following the obvious electoral strategy, which is to challenge the ANC and make inroads into the black constituency, they've returned to a very conservative white and colored base. And I think, therefore, defined a ceiling which they won't grow beyond. I'm very interested to see what Herman Mashaba's party does. I mean, they're certainly going to give a really good contest in Joburg, and it's going to be fascinating to watch the outcome of that.
Dr. Nzo?
Thanks, Cathy. I will just quickly respond to the question around what it is that citizens can actually do, to participate in the governance of municipalities. And in my opinion, we understand that our system has completely been broken down when it comes to citizens participating in decision making, citizens participating in holding local government accountable, and also in demanding action to be taken where local government has actually not delivered on their accountability mechanisms and breaking down of relations between constituencies and those in power. I think that one of the methods that citizens should also look at is invented spaces. We know that we've got invited spaces, which are your ward committees, which are also in a dysfunctional and cannot invent their own spaces where they can co-opt local government, especially local representatives, to be part and parcel of the ongoing dialogues around the development. We know that civil society organizations exist in our communities, even though they may not be formalized civil society movements, but there is civic agency. I mean, we've seen a lot of those cropping up where people have even took an identity of calling themselves, concerned citizens, maybe around issues around housing, water, sanitation, etc. So those spaces can be utilized as spaces where local representatives are brought in to participate. I mean, this morning I was even talking to a group of civil society organizations in the Eastern Cape who are interested in conducting social audits, because one of the problems that they're experiencing in the district municipality is that the municipality is not providing them water, and yet the district municipality's main function is the provision of sanitation and water. So I was explaining to them how they can actually even use social audits as a way of engaging and opening up these spaces, but more importantly, holding local government accountable, because if you use social audit platforms where there is citizen engagement, then you have the right to demand access to information, you have the right to demand tenders that have been published. If there's a tender that has been published on providing water tankers and tender is and that serving that, then the community can actually demand to see the service level agreement and see what are the agreed services that they should be providing, and therefore hold that service provider and the institution of local government accountable. So you need to think of these various innovative ways that you can initiate a dialogue with local government, but also to make local government see that citizens are aware of their rights and responsibilities, and are also aware of the constitutional mandate that is given to local government. So those are some of the ways in which citizens need to take back control of their civic agency when they see that the local state is not responding, because that civic agency is not prevented in the Constitution. In fact, South Africa is one of the countries in Africa that has a very vibrant civic organizations, civic communities, that option being brought to the public and demanding accountability from the state, even through the Zondo Commission that had been happening in South Africa for the past 2 to 3 years. So yeah, that's how I would like to address.
I think just a quick follow up to what you've said, Dr. Nzo. The reality is that oftentimes what we also find is that people are deliberately made to become frustrated with the options that are available for them to actively participate. And what then can people do in those instances? So where, yes, you are trying to participate, but you're deliberately left out of those processes. Because again, you know that there are multiple interests at play, and oftentimes if you're not seen to be part of those who are going to be playing ball and playing to the politics of the day, you could well not be welcome in some of these committees and conversations.
Absolutely, Cathy. One thing that we also forget is that, elite politics are not just national politics, but they're also relevant to local elite politics as well, where you find that they thrive in systems of patronage, they thrive in systems of partisanship. If you're not within close proximity of those who are in power or those who have the ability to influence power, just like how Crispian had actually mentioned earlier, of bureaucrats whom you can regard as rogue, powerful bureaucrats who are able to manipulate the system, then as an ordinary citizen, you end up, being excluded in those processes. And one way in which we have seen in South Africa, just as a typical example, besides just participating in decision-making, but also participating in the local economy as well, is, the local economic development process and the policy position taken that 30% of the local suppliers want to do business with the municipality must come from the communities, and including labor as well. But you find that there are these dynamics that are involved, those who get the opportunities to do business with government, participate in the labor projects in local government, and also influence the direction. They are the ones who are closer, to the local elites and the powers may be. So there you also have those dynamics as well, where you get to understand how exclusionary politics also play out themselves, even within these participatory processes, but also within the state processes of governance as well. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Dr. Nzo. Miyelani?
I think maybe to be specific on the question that was asked, what is it that we do as DSO Consulting to assist municipalities? We effectively help municipalities with the revenue management and enhancement systems within the value chain. So we've adopted a value chain approach to assisting municipalities to unlock any of the blockages that are there, be it from the valuation all the way to the debt collection. And very simply, in terms of how we approach it, is that revenue is a key aspect. We need to make sure that the fund municipality they keep on generating revenue, but have a good planning systems, have good projection systems, have good administrative capability to drive the revenue, and have got analytics to be able to find out areas where they need to have improvements or areas of opportunities, as well as having a dynamic customer relationship management system. This is what we're seeing of municipalities, in that the basics in terms of revenue coverage, they are not taking advantage of the revenue line items. They are not taking advantage, for instance, of the capability to convert the revenue line items, such as outdoor advertising, for instance, into revenue. So municipalities, I think, from a funding model, which I alluded to, one that has the equitable share, but the biggest bulk of it, which has the fact that they have to generate revenue. This is what we do. And the question is, why are municipalities not at least improving in terms of the state of finances? it would be for the fact that they are not taking advantage of the line items all the way up to managing the customers and developing a customer centered strategy. So I think from the other aspects of talking about how can citizens be more participate, I think we've seen a large dependence on having to go to a municipality. So a municipality has become a destination, whereas a municipality should be something that is available on a 24-hour, 24/7 basis, and I should. Sending messages and different things that help municipalities to be able to at least deliver services without any kind of interruption. So that is the other aspect, that we need to take away the dependence of making a municipality a place, but let's make municipalities to be online. And let's make sure that people can pay municipalities online, can lodge queries online, can have video conferencing consultations with officials, and you can essentially be able to have a municipality from anywhere. So I think that is one of the aspects that we are striving to do. We do a lot of customer education as well, which is something around how do we change the mindsets of customers, the mindsets of officials, so that we understand that this is a service environment. It's not an entitlement space. It's not something that we have to do citizens a favor, and so on. So those are some of the aspects that I think citizens can take up by demanding to have more ways that they can interact with their municipalities, and more channels that they can be able to do the things that some are mundane, such as getting a statement. You don't need to take a taxi or drive all the way to a municipality. You should be able to get your statement with ease. You should be able to pay with ease. You should be able to lodge a query with ease. You should be able to set up an arrangement with ease, and the host of other things of being able to report potholes by taking a picture with a GPS location and sending it to the municipality, and being able to track to see if someone has attended to that type of a query, or at least a complaint that has been logged. So that is one of the ways that, at least to answer the two questions in a blended way.
Thanks for that, Miyelani. I'm going to take the second and final round of questions. Here's one. How else can citizens hold politicians accountable other than voting that happens every 4 to 5 years? And what should the relationship between traditional leaders and ward councillors in rural South Africa be? Somebody else wants to know, what existing mechanism does COCTA have to ensure monitoring and evaluation of programs, this is performance and projects, fulfilled to the letter? So that's what they would like. That's what they would like to know there. And I think there was a question that I saw earlier. It was around the transparency of municipalities, and how do we get municipalities to actually be more transparent, where they publish the information that affects them on their websites, that you don't have to go searching and asking and getting, different types of processes just to know who got that tender and why it is that X company received it and not the other one. Let me begin with you, Dr. Olver.
Thanks, Cathy. Yeah, sorry, I've been trying to type some replies to the questions, but it's really hard to multitask at my age. I think I'm going to leave it to young people like you. There was a great question around websites. And someone had mentioned that the Dalla Omar Institute did the survey of municipal websites. Most of them are terrible. I mean, first of all, they don't give you the information that you need. They don't have the annual financial statements, the IDP, the annual report. I mean, these are things that citizens are entitled to have. The law says that you must be provided with those documents. But more importantly, very few municipalities give you the ability to transact with the municipality online. Because most of us don't want to go and stand in a queue at a municipal office and deal with a grumpy official. If there's a query on my bill or my rates account, or there's a leak in the street that I want fixed, you should be able to report it online and get a response online. And the reality is that our municipalities have been really slow to embrace all of the advantages that information technology makes available. I mean, it's possible to take a large, complex machine like a municipality and give it a full online presence that you can engage with and transact with. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people aren't IT literate. You still need, to be able for some people to go into the office. But the bulk of people, and increasingly as, what COVID's done is ramp the whole of society into a new information age. Government's got to catch up very rapidly. So I think we should run a campaign to get municipalities to have a better online presence and to create an interactive customer management portal that we can all engage with.
Dr. Olver, part of what that would require is that the municipality would actually have to have a grasp on issues. So you're talking about, and I think Miyelani also mentioned it, not having to take a taxi to town to get your statement. But then that means that the municipality would actually need to have a handle on its billing system. And you take a look at a place like the city of Johannesburg, that struggles with billing. What more for smaller, more rural municipalities that, how do we begin to solve some of those very, very basic issues that, life as much as it does, especially for ordinary citizens?
The billing, the reason Johannesburg has never solved the billing problem is because there are senior politicians and officials that don't want it solved. And that's because there's a whole lot of money to be made on kickbacks and bribes in fixing a dysfunctional system for people that are willing to pay to get it fixed. So, I mean, let's not raise the Joburg billing issue. I've got stories to tell you on that front.
I just looked at the time and I'm like, why is this only coming up now?
This is not complicated, and for smaller municipalities, it's actually easier than a complex system like Joburg, where the systems are so big and so widespread that it's very difficult to get a handle on it. For smaller rural municipalities, it's possible to have a bird's eye view of all of the earths in the town and in the surrounding rural areas, what services each is getting, what bill is attached to it, querying that. This is not rocket science. It can be done, and it's something that citizens, I think, should demand. So let's make that an election, and 2021 local government elections, let's make that a campaign issue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too big an issue to actually ignore. Doctor, let me get you to weigh in here.
Sorry, Kath, I was just trying to unmute myself. I want to talk to that issue around, transparency and, agreeing with the previous two speakers around, being able to use technology to actually take us to a level where we are transcending into a much more transparent and a much more efficient local government system is one of the greatest challenges that we are faced with in South Africa. I mean, back in the years when I used to be a student at the University of Birmingham, we used to actually get notifications, from our counselor about meetings that are going to happen, about council decisions that have been taken that were affecting, that ward. And when you go online to the Birmingham City Council, a website, you can actually click, on the ward councillors, see their profile, take down their number, and actually send them an immediate message, that they can be able to, to respond to. So sometimes you find that, that's the kind of difference and reality that we end up having to live with if you compare South Africa as a developing country with developed countries that are much more advanced. And it actually talks to issues around diversity, around the modernization agenda of local government. And this applies even with our politics. Have our politics modernized over time, have our bureaucratic, systems and management systems modernized. We find that we still are lacking behind. But one thing that I did even raise in one of the discussions that I had is that why are we not even using the technology platforms that have been, given to us during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we are able to see the processes of committees sitting in council, so that we understand what there are interviews that committees actually have to air, online, where they are interviewing senior bureaucrats and state officials. Why can't we do that for municipal managers and senior managers, so that we can make the process more transparent and see if whether, the officials who are going to be appointed to deliver the services that we need, to manage the services that we need, are indeed capable of doing that, and they have the necessary skills, they understand the environment and the legislation, so that if there are any nefarious, imposition of those who are not within that position, we can actually question that. I mean, look at the way in which the appointment of the NYDA board had been questioned, because citizens were given that opportunity, Cathy, to interact, in virtual spaces with these processes. And that's what we need with local government. So I think moving forward in the process of reforms of professionalizing local government, we need that kind of transparency. And again, talking to publications of tenders and contracts, the National Treasury has a regulation which says municipalities must publish this information, so that we can see whether contractors have been appointed according to their merit and procurement processes have been followed, compliance, etc. But municipalities do not want to publish that information. And that's why the demand should be on us as citizens to know that we have this legislative tool that we can use against our local government. Again, that's another process of participating in our governance systems at local government, where we have to enact on our civic agency. Yeah.
Dr. Nzo, thank you so much for that. Miyelani, I literally have 2 minutes for you to just share a few of your reflections. Make that 1.5 minutes, actually. Go for it.
So I think to bring it home with respect to how do we fix local government, number one, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Resounding yes. What are the key building blocks that we need to look at? It's definitely going back into making sure local government has the right skills within itself, makes the right partnerships, the strategic partnerships I spoke about within the stakeholders such as ESCOM. So no one government should be fighting against each other or taking each other to court, to try and gain or at least recover monies. But the next thing is around the citizen. I think this is where we are shortchanging the citizen and why local government is not working. And I kind of, in a way, if you talk of a campaign to modernize and to make the municipalities digital and make the municipalities to be more accessible, it goes a long way. But the basic thing that we must go into is how do we create a customer relationship management that works for the citizen, so that the citizen can be able to have at least the powers to interact, to track things, to see things in terms of where they are, and so on. So I think that is where it starts, to building and us and demanding that, as a citizen, you have a transparency, whether through a system, whether through channels, whether through the various things that gives them at least the preview into what's going on within municipalities. That will take municipalities even further, because all of a sudden it's not just about us hiding in our offices or others, trying to access services without knowing where where to go and knock on the doors. So it's a modern local government system that we are looking for. It's one that is cooperative in nature, which ensures that the roles, the functions, as well as the responsibilities of each one of the stakeholders are taken into account. It's about the integration of all of the spheres of government and the coordination and allocating resources properly. I think that is where, if you just reduce it to the whatever the noise that we have, if we can do those things, properly, I think we'll take local government even further and take it into the next level.
I think I did say at the beginning of this conversation that we needed exactly, was it a year, 365 days, or multiply that by 5 in order to get a full roundup of what's happening in the local government space and, really be able to fully reflect on the challenges that are being faced. But you as the panelists, I believe, have been really exceptional in, drawing in all of the different issues that, that face local government. But I think more importantly, emphasizing the importance and the role that we as citizens can and should play when it comes to holding local government accountable. And the one thing that I get is that it's not going to be easy. And so perhaps we shouldn't give up just, after the first couple of times of trying to get involved and that not working. We also need the level of vigor that perhaps the politicians also have when it comes to demanding our space in local government and really taking it up. So let me thank you. Thank you to all of the panelists that have been part of this conversation today. And of course, this conversation has been brought to you by the Accountability Lab South Africa, together with their partners at the Danish Embassy of South Africa. One of the things that the Accountability Lab does is that it believes in naming and faming civil servants who are getting it right. So we've been speaking mostly about those that are getting it wrong, but there are some few bright shining stars within the public service. And if they of course have chosen winners of the annual Integrity Icon Awards. And these are individuals that are seen as kind, hardworking, committed, and ethical public servants. You can read more about them. The website there is integrityicon.org/South Africa. And I suppose it's an encouragement really for all of us to see where the gaps in public service lies. And if in fact we have the courage and the bravery to get involved in fixing some of the problems, because it looks like that's what is going to require. I think the next conversation will need to ask all of those who were in government why they left and what it is that those who want to get into the public space need to do. And yes, I'm looking at you, Dr. Olver and Miyelani, because you were both in that space. So perhaps just some of the skills on surviving the public service amidst all of these challenges, because we certainly do still need good men and women in that space. So just another reminder of that website link again, it's integrityicon.org/South-Africa. So South-Africa there. Thank you all for being part of this conversation. Do think deeply and think very carefully about where you'll be placing your cross at the local government elections this year. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Thank you to all the other panelists, Crispian as well as Dr. Nzo.
Yeah, and thanks to our team of participants who were asking extremely lively questions. You really helped make the session come alive.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to our Accountability Lab.